welcome to this UK Squirrel Call webinar for National Mammal Week. This week is led by the Mammal Society, and you can find more ways to get involved in events and awareness raising via their website, mammal.org.uk. Also, I just want to take a quick moment to highlight our next webinar on the 12th of May for International Plant Health Day and National Plant Health Week. We'll look at grey squirrel damage to trees, why they target and are attracted to certain trees more than others, how you can monitor for damage and why that's important, and how you can submit your results to the UK Squirrel Accords Tree Damage Survey for 2026. I will put a link in the chat for the webinar, and you can see our website, squirrelaccord.uk, for more information on the survey, which is really important data gathering exercise. Excuse me. But today we are looking at two native mammals, red squirrel and pine marten. Katy from Ulster Wildlife joins us to discuss red squirrel and pine marten conservation and conflicts from a Northern Ireland perspective. But I know this is an area of great interest to many across the UK. Dr. Bethany Smith will give an overview of the new National Red Squirrel Recovery Strategy for England, which is very exciting. This work was funded by Natural England, supported by the UK Squirrel Accord, and is an important part of delivering the wider England Red Squirrel Action Plan. Following their presentations, we will hold a Q&A. There is a chat function for general discussions, and please do say hello, but use the Q&A function of Zoom for any questions you wish the panel to answer. Great, so I will pass over to our first speaker, who is Beth.
Thanks, Kay. I did just notice there's a comment in the chat about the sound being awful. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I could hear you fine, Kay, so I don't know whether that's an individual issue or a wider issue. But if you can't hear me, just say in the chat and we'll try and figure something out, but hopefully you
You
can.
sound fine to me, so hopefully it works for most people. Oh, the sound's
Okay.
fine for others. Okay, maybe it's just an individual.
Just wanted to check before I start
Yeah,
whittering
yeah.
on no one can actually hear
No,
me.
thanks, Beth.
And let's check this is sharing. All good?
Yes, that looks great. Thank you.
Perfect. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, Kay. I'm Beth Smith. I'm a postdoctoral researcher from the Zoological Society of London, and I'm giving this mini presentation on what is actually a huge report for you this morning on behalf of everyone who worked on this report, and in particular my other colleague, Kyle Kennup, who is conveniently on holiday today, so couldn't be here to join in, but he's definitely the other 50% of this huge report, not just me. And so what we worked on for the last couple of years is developing a recovery strategy for England, for red squirrels, obviously, and basically taking a not like slightly different approach to what other people might take using structured decision making. It's not. There we go. You can read this report. It's now publicly available on the Natural England website. So this was a Natural England funded report supported by the UK Squirrel Accord. So if you want to find it, hopefully you can see this and the slides will get circulated, I guess. But it is online on the Natural England website. And I will forewarn people that it's a very, very lengthy report. And if you just want to get a general sense of it, then maybe just read the exec summary to begin with. I don't think I need to go into too much detail to presumably this group of people in terms of red squirrel background conservation, but we're now in a situation where there are fewer than 40,000 red squirrels in England. They've undergone a huge range contraction from about 95% of their habitat. This is not just grey squirrels, it is also habitat related as well, but one of the main drivers of this reduction in red squirrels is to do with the introduction of the invasive grey squirrel, which outcompetes red squirrels for food and resources, and also spreads a deadly disease to red squirrel called squirrelpox virus. So a lot of the management efforts today have focused on grey squirrel control. And so a lot of people say, well, okay, that's simple then. We know exactly what we need to do. We need to do grey squirrel management. But ultimately, there's actually really no simple solution. So there are millions of grey squirrels now. We see them all over England, absolutely everywhere. There are lots of different people involved in the decision making around this, and lots of different groups of people who have very different perspectives and values on how this management should be done, if it should be done at all. Lo and behold, lots of people like grey squirrels. Even I like grey squirrels. I like seeing squirrels in my garden and parks. For a lot of people, it might be the only mammal that they actually see on a regular basis anyway. When we're doing grey squirrel control, we also have this issue of catching non-target species in grey squirrel traps. So that was something that came up as an issue. And ultimately, a lot of people were saying to us, look, this is not also, in terms of grey squirrel control, it's not just about red squirrels, but it's also about the potential ecological damage that grey squirrels have as well. So, with their bark stripping of trees and the tree damage that grey squirrels um, influence. I also sometimes say grey squirrel instead of red squirrel. Hopefully, you know which one I'm talking about. I'm really trying to like check myself that I'm saying the right species, but hopefully it's fine. And then just a brief little introduction to what I'm talking about with structured decision making. So this is not something that's rocket science. It's just a very structured way of thinking through problems, where essentially what we're doing is starting with the decision problem. So making sure that we have a very clear idea of what the problem is and the scope and the scale of what we're working with. And then we first look at defining the objectives. So basically, we start by saying what is it that actually everybody really, really cares about. And then we can develop the alternatives, i.e., think about the actions that are available to us to achieve those objectives. And a lot of time people go straight into thinking about actions, but whereas we make it sure it's really clear what the goals of those actions should achieve in the first place. Once we've thought about alternatives, which you can just think of in terms of like different strategies for now, um, once we have those different strategies, then we need to say, okay, what actually happens if we do those strategies? So, what are the consequences for the objectives, for the things that we care about if we do those actions? And then, because this is conservation and nothing is ever straightforward, and also if it was straightforward, then we would already know what to do. We typically end up in a trade-off space where some of the objectives some of the strategies perform very well for some of the objectives and really poorly for some of the other ones. So then we need to kind of run through a process to see what is it, like which of these different strategies might be the best compromise or ones that work for different people. So that's kind of that is what we did in this project. So we agreed a problem statement. Then me and Kyle and some other colleagues, we facilitated lots of workshops and sort of surveys, questionnaires to understand different people's values so that we could then articulate those as objectives. Then we constructed a list of possible actions that we combined into different strategies. Then the bulk of the work for us, sat on our computers, was developing models to predict the outcomes of those strategies for the different objectives. Hosting more kind of stakeholder workshops to look at the trade-offs and try and figure out, okay, what is it that works for different people? Because this report only got published last week, it's, as you can imagine, has not been implemented yet. There's no like final decision, there's no implementation, but the point of this process is that once it does get implemented, that we monitor what happens, then we feed it back into this loop so that we're doing a kind of adaptive management process where we can update this decision through time if the information that we have or the situation differs in the future. So I'm going to skip slightly over the first step, which is the decision problem, because I think everyone here kind of understands that quite broadly. But we were working on, okay, how do we recover red squirrels across England? So that's the very, very loose decision problem. Through those workshops, what we came up with as a group and agreed upon was that when making that decision over what to do for red squirrel recovery across England, we should be factoring in these different concerns or objectives. So those were red squirrel recovery in terms of persistence, so how likely it is that we'll still have red squirrels in England in the next 25 years. The distribution of those red squirrels after 25 years, how much tree damage would be occurring. Also welfare implications for red squirrels dying of squirrelpox disease, but also for grey squirrel control. So what are the welfare implications of all the different methods of managing grey squirrels, whether that's lethal or the kind of potential up and coming non-lethal methods? How much non-target species bycatch there might be, related to how much grey squirrel management and live trapping and kill trapping is going on. How connected people feel to nature, so in terms of how likely they are to see either a red squirrel or grey squirrel in their garden and how that kind of makes them feel connected to their surroundings. The acceptability of the actions, both at a national and a local scale, so how opposed or in support of the different grey squirrel control methods the general public would be. And then ultimately how much these things cost. So I'm sure there are quite a few like red squirrel conservation volunteers on here who know it's a lot of this money, a lot of this stuff comes down to how much things cost, whether they can be implemented or not. So we really have to factor that in when making decisions. I can't run through absolutely everything in here, but essentially when we were building the different strategies, because we're looking at a England-wide scale, this is a huge project and we had to kind of break up England some way. So what we did, if you look at this map on the right, is we took a section in the north, which was defined by the current red squirrel distribution in the north of England, and called that Northern England. We treated the Isle of Wight slightly separately as an island that basically the strategies kind of don't really influence. But then we separated off the southwest from this area here, which is we just defined as the rest of England. And the reason we separated off the southwest was because people said that it might be possible, with it being a peninsula, to start grey squirrel control or even eradication, sort of from the tip and work your way up. And there was a lot of potential or willingness to think about red squirrel reintroductions down in the southwest, also to coincide with pine marten reintroductions that have happened and are potentially planned for the future in that area. So we separated off as a complementary potential other geographic lump that we could work with. And then what we did is we developed these 18 different strategies that were a combination of different like effort levels of lethal grey squirrel management, potential in the future for fertility control or a squirrelpox vaccine, where these actions were taking place, and then whether the strategies included moving red squirrels around and where they might, like which area they were confined to. So we always start with making sure that we model what happens if we just stop doing everything, if we just do nothing. We also model what happens if you just continue doing what's happening like at the minute, so the status quo. And then strategy 4 here was a swap from, okay, if fertility control and the squirrelpox vaccine become available and we move away from lethal control into these non-lethal methods, what happens? And then the rest of these kind of move into grey squirrel control across different regions of this map here. So Northern England, Southwest, or England wide, so incorporating everywhere in England. And these little plus and so 1 plus and 2 plus plus is basically where we've got a duplicate strategy. So here, for example, strategy 5 is grey squirrel management, like increased effort in Northern England, and that's just grey squirrel like lethal control. And then when we've got a plus after that, it means that we've included fertility control, and then plus plus means we've included fertility control and the squirrelpox vaccine. And that pattern kind of repeats itself. So we're kind of getting like increasing levels of effort and spatial coverage the further down this table that you go. And so to model what would actually happen if we did those 18 different strategies, I can't take too much credit for this. This was mostly Kyle, which is why I say don't think I did absolutely everything in this. It's very much 50-50. He adapted some previous biological models into a new multi-species demographic model, which looked at grey squirrel, red squirrel, and pine marten interactions. So kind of all of these different things about their survival probabilities, fecundity, dispersal, competition, squirrelpox, that's general disease dynamics, how pine marten predation might influence grey squirrels, red squirrels, the underlying habitat variables, and then included all the different management actions on top of that. And this was a huge, huge model that we had to run a lot and would not have been possible without the supercomputer at the Zoological Society of London. So this model was basically simulated. So we looked at what happens to grey squirrel, red squirrel, and pine marten populations at a 10 by 10 kilometre grid cell. So every 10 by 10 kilometre of grid cell of England. What happens every 30 days, so every month for the next 25 years. Bear in mind that we weren't just thinking about red squirrel recovery, we had all these other objectives. So we also had to work out what the consequences for those objectives would be. And I'm going to very quickly just like kind of skip over these, but we looked at non-target species bycatch. So this was a bit of a proxy in terms of how much kill trap effort was going on per hectare over 25 years. We came up with a sort of composite score of how connected people would be to nature based on whether they could see red squirrels or grey squirrels, with red squirrels, based on previous research, being rated slightly higher than grey squirrels. How much tree damage was occurring, depending on like how many grey squirrels there were in areas. Again, using previous research from forest research, trying to predict the social acceptability both at a local and national scale. So local being the areas that these actions are taking place in. welfare was this whole huge undertaking. So I can't really go into it, but it's in the report. But we looked at how what the welfare impact would be for grey squirrels for each of the different methods. And then in terms of red squirrels, we looked at how many red squirrels would die from squirrel pox over the entire 25 years. And then we costed it all out, as if everyone was being paid to do all the actions in the strategies, and then included the cost of translocations based on previous translocation costs. So previous reintroduction costs for red squirrels in Wales. So once we'd done all that, which was a long time, then we had these really nice kind of spatial outputs. And I can't go through absolutely everything again, so I'm just going to show you a couple of the different maps for the different objectives. So in terms of red squirrel distribution, what you can see here is a map for each strategy. And so starting up here, we've got what happens if we do nothing, what happens if we continue doing what we do now, and then this kind of feeds all the way up, like I was saying, to these bigger kind of spatial scales where we start with Northern England, moving down to kind of Southwest England, and then doing these like England-wide suppression strategies along the bottom. So what you can see here is the probability of that. So these are the counties of England, the probability of each county containing red squirrels, where the more yellow, so the lighter the colour, the higher the probability. Yeah, if you concentrate on Northern England, you get higher probabilities of having red squirrels in Northern England. But if we do England-wide suppression, then we start to see like higher probabilities across a broader area, which makes sense. It's not rocket science. Same kind of maps really, it's just showing red squirrel occurrence after 25 years. So what's the probability between 0 and 1 of you actually seeing red squirrels in these areas or having red squirrels in these areas? And again, just showing that if we do nothing or continue just doing what we're doing right now, this is not looking very good for red squirrels. But actually, once we start building up and increasing grey squirrel control efforts, we start to see a slightly better picture. Kind of flip that on its head. This is the grey squirrel occurrence. So we basically are not eradicating grey squirrels with the current strategies, or if we stop doing anything. You can see that we've got grey squirrel coverage pretty much everywhere. And then, yeah, sort of gets less and less. Again, kind of makes sense. And then that tracks with tree damage as well. So these England-wide suppression strategies. So basically in this case it's the opposite. So the darker colours are better. So the more purple here is less tree damage, less bark stripping happening. I'm conscious of time. Sorry, Kay, I'll wrap up quickly. Try to anyway.
No, you're
What we're
fine.
doing.
You're fine. If you want another 5 minutes, it's fine.
Okay, I'll try not to take 5, but
Yeah.
it's just like 250 pages of report and it's quite hard to distill it.
No, I understand that.
I'm sure people have questions for things that I've skipped over. Apologies. Okay, so what we then do with structured decision making is we try to lay everything out in what we call a consequence table, which looks like this, and these probably look slightly overwhelming right now. What we're showing is all the different objectives, all the things that people cared about along the top and the way that we measured them. And then down here is all the different 18 strategies. I've coloured them here where green is the best outcome and blue is the worst outcome. So I think it's probably easier just to think about red squirrels for a second. So these are the 4 kind of ways that we measured red squirrel recovery. And if you just look at the probability of having red squirrels in England in 25 years' time, these first 4 strategies, so like do nothing, status quo, and switching only to non-lethal methods, you're only left with about an 8 to 13% chance of having red squirrels in England after 25 years. It's not looking great, to be honest. But then the England-wide strategy, so this like really like throw the kitchen sink at it kind of strategy at the bottom, we can achieve about a 76% probability of red squirrel persistence in 25 years. But actually, all of these strategies, even from like Northern England, the ones that concentrate on the Southwest and England-wide, they're all somewhat similar. So sort of ranging between, say, like 64% and 76% probability of persistence in 25 years. So they're all kind of similar. And just to note here that we're not seeing 100% probability in any of these strategies, but 75% chance is not bad for a model that's running like 1,000 times, with a lot of uncertainty in the outcomes as well. Um, so it might be if you only care about red squirrel recovery, you might say, okay, well, we need to be doing England-wide suppression of grey squirrels, um, based on the red squirrel recovery numbers. But the whole point of doing this was to actually consider all these different objectives. And what we can see here is that these England-wide strategies that focus on a lot of like grey squirrel control across England might be some of the best for red squirrel recovery, but they're not great in terms of species bycatch because you're doing a lot of grey squirrel control. People's connection to nature because you're removing grey squirrels from an area and not necessarily replacing them with red squirrels in a timely fashion anyway. They're pretty good for tree damage because you're removing grey squirrels, but then they're going to be pretty highly opposed by the public. So if you care about a backlash from the public, then maybe this isn't the best thing to do. Same thing, they're not going to be the best for grey squirrel welfare either. And yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, they cost a lot. When you're doing England-wide activities, it's going to cost more. And so that's when we can see that we get into this kind of trade-off space where it might, and I'm not the decision maker, I'm just throwing ideas out there in terms of how this looks, how people might see it. So you could do England-wide suppression, but you're kind of doing that at a cost in other objectives. Whereas some of these more local strategies are achieving kind of similar persistence of red squirrels, but potentially like with fewer costs. So it actually and cost not in terms of financial, but actually like a negative kind of impact on your other objectives, and also fewer cost or less cost because you're not doing England wide. So they're cheaper. They're potentially not going to be as don't want to say bad, not going to be as impactful on grey squirrel welfare, and especially in fact, I'm going to move on to this bit. Okay, so what you can see here, I think the main point that I'm waffling on about now is basically there isn't a single strategy, so there isn't a single row in any of these columns that is all green or all blue. So none of them are the best and none of them are the worst across all the objectives. So then we had to do a trade-off workshop where we actually ask people how much they care about different objectives based on the outcomes. And so once we have that, then we can figure out, okay, which of the objectives are driving the decision. And once you've factored in how much you care about different objectives versus the actual outcomes for those objectives, which strategies are looking slightly better. So there was a higher preference, maybe surprising to some people on the call. There was a preference for doing nothing. So that's this strategy down here. So where we've got the colours, basically red means it was someone's preferred strategy, so it's their first ranked strategy. Orange is their second, yellow is their third preferred strategy, and then the rest of them, like fourth, are all in grey. So you can kind of see where the colours concentrate. It's either do nothing, concentrate locally on Northern England, or do like throw the kitchen sink at it and do England-wide suppression. Status quo was not preferred, so carrying on with things as they currently are was not preferred. And also interestingly, that alternatives or strategies that included translocation, so reintroducing or reinforcing red squirrel populations, were preferred over the kind of duplicates that didn't involve moving red squirrels around. And that's primarily because once we move red squirrels around, we're changing that connection to nature. So people are still able to see some kind of squirrel, whether it's grey or red, like in their gardens or local parks. So, very quick summary. Sorry, Kay. The current approaches, unfortunately, and this is not diminishing the current work that's going on because there is a huge amount of volunteer effort that I'm sure everyone appreciates, but unfortunately, our model suggests that if we carry on with that, we are going to see extinction of red squirrels in mainland England. But strategies incorporating red squirrel translocations consistently outperformed those without translocations in them. The England-wide suppression of grey squirrel strategies do offer the highest potential for large-scale red squirrel recovery, but that is to the detriment of some of the other objectives. So it costs a lot, it reduces people's connection to nature, not much public support, and there's grey work. grey squirrel welfare implications. So it might be that some of those regional strategies that have similar recovery options, but while providing a sort of compromise on the other objectives, might be preferred. Huge thank you to everyone who was involved in this project. Colleagues both at ZSL, so Zoological Society of London, University of Bern, Kat Walsh, who was our lead from Natural England, and obviously Kay, thank you. And then I cannot finish this presentation without thanking so many people, like more than 60 of you contributed to this project, whether you turned up to workshops, had me pestering you by email, questionnaires, yeah, expert kind of judgment. Thank you. We absolutely could not have done this without you. So yeah, thank you. Um, Hopefully got through enough for it to make kind of sense.
Thank you very much, Beth. I know that was a very tall order to ask you to go through such a complex strategy in such a short amount of time,
I'm
especially
sure there'll
when
be
there's so much
questions.
in it. Yes. And yes, just to echo what Beth said about thank you to everybody that was involved. It definitely couldn't have happened without so much input from everybody. So that's brilliant. Thank you. Beth, do you just want to stop sharing and then we'll pass over to Katy? Just to say, I know that a few people have put their hands up. I don't know what that's for. If it's a question, please just use the Q&A function to ask the question, and I'll put it to the panel afterwards. And if it's an issue with the webinar, just send it me a message on the chat, and I'll try and sort it out.
Okay, can you
Yes, that looks great.
see
Thank
me and hear me? Yes,
Yes.
wonderful. Um, okay, lovely to see so many people on here for the start of Mammal Week. This is great to listen to us today. And especially because the weather is so nice as well. So yeah, thank you all for staying inside today. But yeah, so my name is Katy Bell. I work as Senior Conservation Officer for Ulster Wildlife. So we're the Wildlife Trust in Northern Ireland. And I also represent Northern Ireland on the UK Squirrel Accord Executive Committee. So yeah, I have a couple of hats on today. But I'm going to dive into a bit more about pine marten and their relationships with squirrels, and a little bit about the work we do in pine marten, and also a little bit addressing a conflict with the spread of pine marten. So, but yeah, please, if anyone has any questions, please stick them in the chat, and I'll get to them at the end. Just if for anyone who doesn't know Ulster Wildlife, we work across the whole of Northern Ireland. We have 20 nature reserves. We work really closely with people, communities, young people, farmers, and we save wildlife on land at sea. So my part comes in on the land, and some of the species we work on obviously include red squirrel and pine marten. So we had started red squirrel conservation a long time ago, probably over a decade ago. And you soon realize when you're working on red squirrels, you can't work on red squirrels without working on grey squirrels. And then quickly you realize you can't work on either of these without working on pine marten. So really it's a three species story. And for us to work on red squirrel conservation in any way, we have to consider all three of these species. And Northern Ireland's quite interesting. All are kind of lines and boundaries of where these three species are intertwine a lot more. So some, in England, for example, it's very clear where you've got red squirrel and greys, but ours are very much scattered. So it's very different. And that's it can be good and bad, but in a way, there's some ways that we can maybe help inform conservation across the UK and other parts, and what we've learned from what's going on here. So the history of pine marten in Ireland. So pine marten are known in Irish as catcran, and this just basically means tree cat. They are very cat-like if you've ever seen one, and they do get mistaken for cats quite a lot. And I've also had videos of cats sent to me of people thinking they're pine martens. So that's kind of roughly the size of them, like a reasonably large cat. And it's a very good description of them. So they were highly valued for their fur in the past. So they were heavily persecuted, basically, for their fur, nearly persecuted to extinction. So they kind of carried on in small little pockets of woodland across Ireland. And a lot of people thought they weren't here anymore. Because they're so elusive, they are mainly nocturnal. They're very hard to see. So there was a long period of time where a lot of people didn't think pine martens were here, but they have been here. There have never been any reintroductions of pine marten in Ireland, any spread has always been natural. So there was some legislation that kind of stopped people hunting them, so that helped them a bit. But there's also been a bit of a natural resurgence. It's not all because they've stopped hunting them because they haven't really been on it for a long time. But there's many different factors that come into play, like the woodland cover and things like that. But we have seen this kind of natural resurgence of them in the last decade, which is really, really interesting. So the data on them before, in the 1970s and 80s, this was a survey that was just done on scats. So this was long before kind of camera traps existed. So this was on scat, and this didn't include Northern Ireland at the time, but you can kind of see a picture, and they were like, oh, actually, there's quite a few pine martens here in kind of like the west of the country. But yeah, it's maybe not as reliable. On the scat, but they did do quite an extensive survey. Then in 2007, this was based on sightings. So you can see again still a bit of a spread across the country, but not crazily numerous, but they were still quite evenly distributed. Then in 2012, Colin Lawton started the All Ireland survey. So this is looking at red squirrel, grey squirrel, and pine marten. And this was the distribution of pine marten in 2012. So again, a big kind of population in the middle of Ireland, which is really interesting, and kind of scattered across Northern Ireland. Then in 2019, the same survey, and this was just based on sightings that Ulster Wildlife contributed to in the north. And again, you can just see each time we're kind of getting more and more pine martens, and they're just kind of increasing in little bits. So this survey's done every 7 years. So the next one is 2026, which is this year, and we are repeating it again this year. So we're really, really intrigued to see what happens then. Um, so we then kind of since we started surveying for them, camera traps came into play, and this really gives us a totally different insight into their behaviour and finding them in certain places. So this is a lovely pine marten in County Fermanagh in the west of Northern Ireland. But this really changed the game for us for serving a lot of nocturnal species. But it's really, really lovely to see. And in some places, these are when we're putting camera traps out, we're finding pine marten places where we never knew that they were. So it's a really, really good tool. So we started the Squirrel and Pine Marten survey. Well, Dave Tosh started it in 2014. Ulster Wildlife took over in 2017. So we've been doing that every 2 years, and that's basically camera traps and feeders out in woodlands across Northern Ireland for 2 weeks. And this is looking at grey squirrel, red squirrel, and pine marten. So this is really important study. We have long-term data. Sightings are great, but they're a bit of a snapshot where this long-term data lets us look at the have populations established over time, or is there a drastic change? Have red squirrels suddenly disappeared for a woodland, and then we can investigate why. So it helps our conservation work, and it also helps us look at things kind of on a local scale in particular woodlands and on a landscape scale. So this data is really useful, and like I'm going to show you a few bits from 2024 because that's the last year we have the data from, but we are doing it again 2026, so we're in the middle of it right now. Um, so this is roughly what we do, about 210, 220 woodlands across Northern Ireland that we survey every 2 years. And we carry out a lot of this, but so many people help us. So the likes of National Trust, WWT, the councils, and lots of the volunteer red squirrel groups. We are so lucky in Northern Ireland. We have 14 different red squirrel volunteer groups, some a lot more active than others, but it's great that they do really great work in their local areas. So we trail through a lot of photos, thousands and thousands of them. I just always like to share this one because that's a little pregnant red squirrel. Look at her. So yeah, it's lovely to see. And red squirrels are doing reasonably well in Northern Ireland. We still have a huge impact from greys, huge source populations in the cities. But on our last survey, we recorded red squirrels in 70 woodlands, which is just amazing. Some of them are small and fragmented, and there's still lots of work to be done. But it's really lovely, and it's also amazing to get photos like this and show that they're actually breeding in these woodlands, and that's really nice. Um, but yeah, we get a lot of these guys too. So quite a few daytime pine martens as well. They're mainly nocturnal, but they do turn up if an area is quiet. They do come out during the day. Um, and this is one photo of many of the first time a pine marten is found in the site. So this is the very first time we recorded pine marten in this woodland in 2024. So things like that are happening quite a lot. We're seeing a lot of pine marten movement, and pine martens turn up in new places. And funnily enough, that year was the same year we got red squirrel in this woodland as well for the first time. So it's very interesting. And the two do coexist together very well. I'll get into that slightly more. Um, and we also get a lot of this. It's just they're funny, very entertaining mammals to watch. The collective noun is a richness of martens, which I think this photo illustrates quite well. But yeah, lots of young and kids playing on the feeders and being silly, basically, which is very nice to see. So this is our last map of pine marten. So in 2024, we recorded pine marten in 97 woodlands. So they are our most recorded species, then red squirrel, then grey squirrel, which is amazing. Now, a caveat of that is we do not survey urban areas. So obviously we know there's big populations of greys. But it's really lovely to see. And pine marten are our most numerous species. Which is yeah, it's still a bit crazy. But this is mainly 45% of the woodlands we put a camera out. We're picking up pine marten, so they're found in all 6 counties now. You can see the spread of them. They really used to be up north in County Antrim and out west in County Fermanagh. That was the healthiest populations, but as you can see, they're kind of all over the country now. For the first time in the last couple of years, they've popped up in Derry, Londonderry. This is really interesting for us. We're going to follow this closely and see what this means, because this area has grey squirrel, red squirrel, and pine marten all together. So we're interested to see what the arrival of pine marten will do. We've pine marten around Lough Neagh. That was somewhere we kind of didn't know they were before. So they really are kind of spreading across the country. And it's very, very interesting. So this was just to show you the number of woodlands we're getting them in. Some people have asked, is this because you've looked for them more? No, so this survey effort's been the same. So the survey effort between all these years has been the same. And we've just been picking them up in more places. So it's almost doubled from well, it has more than doubled from 2017 to 2024, almost doubled it in the 5 years from 2017 to 2022. Intrigued to see what it is this year. Is this just going to keep going up? Is it going to kind of level off? Probably at some point. But yeah, and also sometimes pine martens move quite long distances. So are the pine martens staying in that area, or were they just moving through? So so many things that we need to find out, but the data is really important, and we can see that pine marten are doing well. So as I said, we are underway in the 2026 All Ireland survey. So this is hugely important. We really want to see what's happened since 2019. So we're obviously doing our intent survey in Northern Ireland, but we're contributing to the data in Ireland as a whole. So we really, really want sightings. I will put a link in the chat when I've finished talking. For anyone that has any sightings in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, please, please, please send them in. We would love any grey, any red, any pine marten sightings. So we partnered with University of Galway and Vincent Wildlife Trust on this. So it's really, really great to see and we've had loads of sightings already, which is amazing. So we just want to keep them coming. So I just want to touch on slightly a little bit about the coexistence between the species. Now, this is our map from 2024 of red squirrel and pine marten. So there's always a bit of worry about pine marten. This is totally fine. We need to address this. They are a predator. Most of the things when we talk to people, pine marten are pretty lazy. We see that a lot. They're not a predator that's going to go in and kill everything. They eat a variety of food. They'll happily eat berries if they're in front of them than chasing a wood mouse or a grey squirrel. But they do predate grey squirrels, and they do predate reds. Reds have coexisted alongside them. They are totally aware that pine marten are predators, so there's been lots of work done on that, and they have a fear response to them, so they're vigilant. But we've seen them on the feeder 15 minutes after pine marten, but they're aware, they're vigilant, and they're looking. Where greys aren't. They're not aware. They spend more time on the ground. They're easier to catch. But there is a worry when there's a small population of reds in an area of pine marten move in, that they can have an impact on this, and we can't kind of ignore that fear, but they aren't going to have an impact on a landscape scale. They coexist really well and actually are helping reds because they suppress grey populations. So it is very positive. And for example, all these areas here, you can see that's red squirrel and pine marten coexisting in the same woodland, both come into the same feeder and the same camera. And yeah, especially Fermanagh and Antrim, the two have coexisted for, hundreds of years, and they're living totally fine with each other. And the one of the main reasons for that is healthy woodland. So if you've got a really small bit of crappy woodland, basically, the risk is going to be higher to reds for multiple reasons. But if you've got lovely broadleaf woodland and connectivity, then this really, really helps these populations live alongside each other and live like they should. So yeah, there's a lot there of red squirrels and pine martens across the country. I just also want to highlight the grey squirrels and pine marten. So there's a lot less of a lot fewer kind of places where we find grey squirrel and pine marten. And a lot of this changes over time. So actually what we've seen is pine marten show up to an area where grey squirrel, and then grey squirrel are gone. So that's so interesting, and that impact can happen quite quickly. Now, just to say that that it's not the answer always, and the pine marten have to be at a certain density to make that impact. So in urban areas, that is less likely to happen where you have less woodland. But we have seen it happen. Research in Ireland and Scotland has shown this, so it's really interesting. And then just yeah, that area up in Derry, Londonderry, up the top where pine marten have showed up now, and we're really interested to see over time what that does to the grey squirrel population. So much research out there. If you want to delve deep into this, go ahead. There's amazing papers. This is just two that I chose to highlight. So on the left is work by Emma O'Reilly and Colin Lawton out of Galway University, and that was basically looking at the behaviour responses of red squirrels and how kind of vigilant they were of the presence of pine martens. That was really interesting. And that was 2025 that was published. And then there's lots of work by the likes of Emma Sheehy and Josh Twining on work in both Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland and Scotland, showing basically how pine marten are impacting grey populations and helping red populations. So there's lots of research on there. It's really interesting. So I just wanted to pinpoint this map. I know that Beth showed this, and I'm sure some of you have seen this before, but we had worked together with the Mammal Society and the Squirrel Accord, and we all kind of got together to try and redo this one. So this is data from 2017 to 2022. But when we first looked at it, I was like, well, that surely can't be right. Look at that whole thing's nearly red. But the data is right. So we're really, really interested in this, and just a couple of areas I wanted to highlight. Both these areas, so this only shows red and grey. There's no pine marten on this map. But this shows areas that are totally basically greys have gone from the area, and that is not down to any management. That's actually just down to pine marten. So this is really, really interesting. There's been very little like grey squirrel management in this kind of bit of central Ireland. And ironically, this is where grey squirrels first arrived. So in 1911, they arrived right in the middle of Ireland. They were given as a wedding present in County Longford, and every grey squirrel then spread out from there. But they've gone from here, and they're kind of existing now on the edge of Ireland. So we're very intrigued to see from the 2026 data, is this still the case, and has anything changed? So this is really, really positive. So yeah, and the big source population in the likes of Dublin and Belfast. And I know Emma, she is working on a feasibility study on getting rid of grey squirrels from Dublin, which would be very interesting. And we then would like to look at Belfast after that. So as I say, pine marten are spreading, and this is great. And we can talk a lot to our colleagues across the water about this. Pine marten are doing well in Scotland, but they're definitely very low numbers in England and Wales, and they've carried out reintroductions. So it's important for us to kind of talk to them and tell people what living with a big population of pine martens is like. So this is a photo of a pine marten in an urban garden in Lisburn, and not too far from Belfast, and another one. The pine martens are popping up in gardens more often now. I'm seeing them more. It used to be you would never see them, but recently, they've run out in front of the car, when I've been driving home and things at night. So it's definitely becoming more of a common sight, which is just amazing. But with this, obviously, there's a few issues that pine marten bring. One, that they predate chickens. And two, they den in houses. Those are the main issues. So that they do den in roofs and things, usually when the woodland quality is low. But their native predator is so amazing for us to see the spread of them. But there is a public perception of predators that we have to address. And some people, you know, it's the same with birds of prey. People spread rumors about them, and they're like, I saw one eating my sheep, and it's blah 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 blah. So we have to just like address this and talk about pine martens and actually what they're going to do. So it's kind of important to address that. Also, just the correct messaging. So it's really important we spread the good news about pine martens and their impact on reds and how lovely it is to see them. There are worries that we address among red squirrel volunteers. This is normal, and we can't ignore this. We really do have to address this and talk to them and look in more detail into this, because it is important to address it. So don't ignore the conflict. That's my advice. Anyone that's anywhere with pine marten reintroductions or anything. There's great advice out there from NIA or the Vincent Wildlife Trust have a website called pinemarten.ie. And this has great advice for householders if you have pine martens in your roof, and for people that keep chickens, for how to pine marten proof your chicken coop. So there's loads of things out there. We can live alongside pine marten very easily. And yeah, it's very exciting for me that they're spreading. And just, I suppose, to conclude, that pine marten are a really important part of red squirrel conservation, and we need to include them in that story, but they're also not the silver bullet. They're not going to be the answer everywhere, and there's many other things we need to address, like grey squirrels and woodland cover alongside this, but it is important to talk about pine marten. So that QR code is just to submit sightings for Northern Ireland if anyone has any sightings. My email's there if anyone has any other questions. And I'll put a link in the chat here for the All Ireland survey.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Katie. I love that. I didn't know that. A richness of martens. I must learn more of these collective nouns. And I certainly encourage everyone that lives within the island of Ireland or visits this year in any way to submit any squirrel and pine marten sightings to the survey. Monitoring is such an important conservation action, and actually is a really easy way for everyone to get involved in conservation activities. We've got a few questions. I don't know if Beth is still with us, but I'll start with you, Katie, if that's all right. Can anyone get help to recognise can anyone get help to recognise the difference between red squirrel and pine marten hair samples? Because if they're finding it hard to distinguish between the two.
Yeah, I think under microscope it is easy enough. I think it's been done a lot by Emma, so maybe maybe there's some guidance on it somewhere. I don't know if guidance actually exists, but there's lots of researchers that have spent a lot of time looking at those hair samples. So yeah, we might be trying to chase her up and see if she has a little guidance or something. That might be nice.
Oh yeah, Emma's just come into the chat to say yes, it's very straightforward if you know how. So maybe Emma can help us work out how.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Emma.
Great, thanks. Well, Jan, I think Jan, I got your email. So maybe if I connect you and Emma up or something afterwards, that would be the best way to do it. Unless there's an easy link that Emma can share with us. Beth, there's a question why there is a strategy and modelling done by you for England instead of kind of UK wide.
Um,
That was your remit, I know, but
yeah, I mean, I have a very boring answer to that in just that it was a Natural England funded project and therefore the remit of Natural England is England. Um, so that's why it's an England-wide recovery strategy and that's why we used England.
yeah,
What I would say is that we do take into account like that it's a fluid border between like Scotland and Wales. We don't treat it in isolation in the models, but yeah.
yeah, thanks very much, Beth. Yes, I mean, it very much was an England project as part of the England Red Squirrel Action Plan and looking at what we do. But there are action plans and strategies for all of the different countries, and we very much do try and link up with each other and connect with each other because animals don't understand borders. That's fair enough.
Yeah.
Roland's put in the chat that the best book on mammal hair ID is by Teerink. Jan, if that helps. Beth, another one for you. Just say it's really interesting to see people's connection to nature considered. Did the study include anything about people's perceptions of control and how they would feel about the scale of that being rolled out in each option?
Yeah, so I don't know about perceptions per se, but we did include, so one of the objectives was public acceptability. So we did look at public support and opposition to the different grey squirrel management actions that were in each strategy. So I think that's what you're asking, and yes, that is in there. I didn't do anything new per se. I used data that was collected by Forest Research in 2018 on a very big, very well conducted large scale study on public attitudes and yeah, acceptability of the different control methods, and that is factored in.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Beth. Um, there's a question from Matt. Do you have any concerns or evidence that the feeding stations increase risk of predation of red squirrels by pine martens because they become focal points for both?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. No, we've never seen any predation of red squirrels at a feeding station. We have seen predation of greys. Um, from everything we've seen, the reds are just so vigilant. That we've been doing this for so long. There's so many people that have some of the squirrel groups that have long-term feeding stations up. Never had any predation of reds or pine marten there. So no, I think they're on it. I think most likely predation is in drays. That's usually where pine marten target. Again, pine marten are lazy, so we've actually seen them. They don't even bother to chase squirrels. But we have video evidence of them, grey squirrels in the feeder. And the pine marten, the grey squirrel just doesn't notice, and the grey squirrel doesn't get out, and it's no concern about pine marten at all. And we've seen that predation, but no red, thankfully.
Yeah, no, I've seen a couple of videos, one in a feeder, in or on a feeder, and one on the ground. But again, it was just it's just like they're sat there. And it's just such an easy target for the pine marten. They're not going anywhere. They're just sat there.
No.
Um, so this question, the orthodox view that pine martens are mostly restricted to isolated forests away from people. As the population increases, are we seeing any behaviour changes which would lead them to inhabit in more human populated areas? And I think that, some of your photos back that up.
Yeah, for sure. And there's really interesting research done by Josh Twining in Slieve Gullion that actually showed in the absence of good denning trees that pine martens actually started denning underground. So that is really interesting. So showing that they are actually adapting to the lack of woodland cover.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, we see them move over big open areas, and we're seeing them in more urban areas for sure. But I think the main restriction is the denning. Really, like they can exist fine and live, but yeah, that they might start doing that more. So it is very interesting, and I think that they're more adaptable than we think. I think they are. Yeah, which is why we've seen them spread so much so quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. And John Lee is also from Northern Ireland, just says pine martens are seen in the centre of Belfast.
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. So
Really urban then.
Yeah, so we had roadkill last year, near the end of last year, like in Belfast. So it's happening.
Mhm. Thank you. One for Beth, just to come back to Beth. Are there any particular landscapes or areas in southwest England where the strategies or introduction of red squirrel could be initiated?
Yeah, I actually just saw that one. I'm just going to try and oh God, where's that come? I'm just going to try and share my screen a second, if that's all right.
Yep.
Hopefully this works.
Yep.
Um, so something that I kind of brushed over in the presentation or just didn't really mention was how we actually asked the model to do the movement of red squirrels, and it was fluid, so we didn't really determine exactly where these red squirrels would be reintroduced. We asked the model to basically say, you're running all these processes in the background in each of these 10 by 10 kilometre square areas. When they become free of grey squirrels for a set amount of time, make it so that we're allowed to do a red squirrel introduction there and that we can do two over the course of the project. And then this is the results of that model. So this, by the way, does not mean that this is exactly where red squirrel reintroductions could or should go ahead. This would need a lot more work, but it gives you an indication potentially. So hopefully you can see this and you can read more about it in the report. When we actually did this for the Southwest, we selected hectads that were complementary to pine marten reintroductions, and that's also kind of coming out here, where we've got pine martens here. So I would suggest complementary action, as you've just heard from Katy as well, with pine marten reintroductions and potential grey squirrel control and red squirrel reintroductions. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Question for Katy. Did you find conflict with game bird releasing as well as those keeping poultry? Is this a concern for local stakeholders, but how much has it actually occurred in your experience?
Oh, sorry, trying to unmute. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, of course, yeah, there has been conflict for sure. It's been an interesting one in that I think it's more the fear than actually we've seen like devastation of kind of game birds. Pine marten behavior is quite interesting. So we work closely with one farmer, for example. He's a very small scale pheasant and grey partridge shoot. And he basically lives with the pine marten fine and says they only take the odd one. So I'm very happy to kind of live with them there. Don't have a problem with them. They don't seem to have this behavior where they try to get in and kill everything. And it's really sporadic, so it's not like if they're there, some years they won't kill anything. So it is very interesting. I think it's interesting to get those perspectives from farmers and game bird keepers. But I mean, we maybe don't have the scale of game bird keeping that there is in England,
Yeah,
Scotland as
I was going
well.
to
So
ask that. Yeah.
it's slightly different. It would be on a smaller scale. So, when there's more money involved, there's more people concerned. But I have had farmers tell me that they shot pine marten, and they then, once I explained to them the impact on red squirrels, they said to me, "Oh, I won't shoot them anymore. That's great. I really like red squirrels." So I think obviously that's not great, but it's really important that we get the message across there as well and just communicate that with farmers really closely.
Yeah, no, I think that's important, sharing all the important messages in there. There's a question about red squirrels on the Septon Coast in northwest England have been told historically that a reintroduction of pine martens there wouldn't be feasible as the woods are not large enough to sustain a healthy population. But given the potential benefits of reintroduction to reducing the greys to our isolated reds, do you think there's a basis to this statement? I think in England, the pine marten reintroductions have been focused on those areas that best support pine martens. So pine marten reintroductions are not being done for red squirrel conservation and grey squirrel management. That is a benefit of them recovering, but that's not the basis of their recovery. So in areas where they are best placed and can, it can support a good pine marten recovery, that's where they're focused on. However, pine martens are moving all over the country at a rate faster than people actually expected them to. So I think over time, they will end up in areas, and like Katy says, they're appearing in areas where you didn't expect them to be because the woodlands Wouldn't necessarily, but they've moved there of their own volition rather than humans moving them there. Um, and just I'm oh, we're nearly out of time. I'm really sorry. Is there? I just wanted to finish with this question. Um, People that are being engaging with stakeholders have raised concerns about fertility. Oh no, that's not the one. No, sorry, I will answer that one separately. Some people in the environment sector, sorry, are sceptical about the long-term viability of red squirrels, particularly in areas on the edge of their current distribution. While it is clear that grey squirrel management and improved habitat connectivity are key factors, what would be the speaker's main messages to those who remain sceptical? I think that's quite a nice question to end on.
I'm guessing that's for me.
I think it's for both for
For
either
both
of
of
you.
us, for
So
everyone.
for people who are concerned about, grey squirrel management or actions for red squirrel conservation, who remain sceptical, what kind of messages can we share with people to kind of get them on board, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, like, obviously, we've just spent a lot of time modeling what happens when we do all these different actions and showing that actually, especially at a really localized, increased effort scale, we can achieve red recovery and really high percent proportions of persistence, chance of persistence of red squirrels in those areas. Um, and we've got, I mean, Kay, you could probably speak to it more, which is why I'm trying not to go into it too much, but there are potential future developments in managing grey squirrels that may be on the horizon. So with like fertility control, possibly even a vaccine. Just the fact that we didn't model gene drive. So I know I've been getting questions about gene drive from other places as well. It's not in there, but maybe at some point in the future it will be there. And I think pine martens are the big one for me as well at the minute, just with their natural recovery and expansion.
Yeah, thank you. I think with gene drive, it's just too early to model any data, wasn't there? So we weren't able to do it. Katie, have you got any messages for those who might be skeptical? I know you've
Yeah.
said a few things already, but
Yeah, I suppose just it's lovely to see that there's so many people in the UK and Ireland dedicated to red squirrel conservation. And I think if all of us hadn't been working on it, and if so many people, the volunteers and everyone hadn't been working on it, red squirrels probably would have been gone. So I think that I think we have all made a big difference, and I think it's lovely to see people dedicated to it, and we've seen like red squirrel recovery happening in Ireland, and it's yeah, we just hope that it continues, and I think we've got a real chance basically.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think for me, it's continuing to communicate the issues that grey squirrels are causing. I think the red squirrel, grey squirrel issue is quite well known across the UK, but far better known than the issue that grey squirrels impact on trees and the tree damage and the bark stripping issues, which isn't just a timber issue. If they're stripping some of your most biodiverse trees out of your landscape, or people won't plant them because of the damage that's being caused, then you're not supporting the biodiversity you need. And stunted, denuded, weakened, stressed, killed trees are not going to provide the healthy woodlands that you need to see for the future. So, like those arguments are really where we need to kind of put that and the evidence behind those. But I think if you look at Northern Ireland, if you look at the work being done in Aberdeen and how excited people are becoming at the return of red squirrels to their garden, and how we can kind of encourage this and encourage these messages. It's a difficult conservation ask for people that love grey squirrels, but essentially what we're trying to do is not just take away their squirrels. We're just trying to, recover the native squirrels that actually are better for our environments. Um, well, thank you very much, Katie and Beth, for your excellent presentations. And any questions on fertility control, please just actually email me and I will deal with them. Fertility control is something that we're very much involved in at the moment. We're in the process of refining the formula of the oral contraceptive and going into landscape scale trials with the feeding hopper. So it's a very exciting time. And we will put out another written update and do another webinar later this year. So to keep you up to date on that. So but thank you very much for joining us for this National Mammal Week webinar. Get involved with all the important opportunities to raise awareness and get involved with the UK's native mammals. Hopefully see you at our next webinar on the 12th of May. And thanks, Katie and Beth again, and goodbye for now.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.